It's 5:05 and welcome into a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Republican State Supreme Court candidate Jefferson Griffin made arguments to the North Carolina Court of Appeals on Monday, challenging over 65,000 ballots in the November the 5th election. Griffin, who is currently an appeals court judge, seeks to have some of those 65,000, if not all of them, thrown out, which could overturn the election results in his race against Democrat incumbent Justice Allison Riggs, who currently sits on the state's highest court. Despite two recounts confirming Riggs' 734-vote lead, a state Supreme Court issued a stay on January the 7th has prevented the election from being certified. It is the last race in the country yet to be determined from the November the 5th election. Griffin's challenge targets ballots from voters with incomplete voter registration, overseas voters lacking ID proof, and individuals who have never lived in the state of North Carolina. His attorneys argued that the State Board of Elections has ignored election law, unlawfully counting these ballots. The case remains in the Court of Appeals after the state Supreme Court declined to bypass it. With Griffin recusing himself, he is currently a Court of Appeals judge. Republicans still hold a majority on both the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. However, Republican Richard Dietz has sided with Democrats in two recent rulings on the matter if it is to make its way to the state's highest court. A lower court dismissed Griffin's challenge in early February, leading him to an appeal, and the appeals court has set a very tight schedule with the election board and Riggs required to respond by tomorrow, Thursday, and Griffin having to file his final brief coming up on Monday. That's March the 3rd. Oral arguments are not going to take place, while both might not potentially take place, while both Griffin and Riggs continue to serve in their respective judicial roles. The Griffin's lawyers wrote, quote, "The State Board of Elections is an administrative agency that broke the law for decades while refusing to correct its errors. At the bottom, this case presents a fundamental question. Who decides our election laws? Is it the people or their elected representatives or the unelected bureaucrats sitting on the State Board of Elections?" They continued by saying if the board gets its way, then is this the real oversight here? It can ignore the election statutes and constituent and constitutional provisions while administering an election however it wants. In response to Judge Griffin's protests, the State Board of Election and opposing candidate Justice Allison Riggs have claimed that Judge Griffin is seeking a retroactive change within election law. Griffin's lawyers wrote on Monday, quote, "That flatly mischaracterizes the timeline. Our registration statuses have required driver's license and or social security numbers since 2004. Our state constitution has imposed a residency requirement since 1776, and photo identification has been required for absentee voting since at least 2018. They also claim that the State Board of Elections is no super legislature and that it does not get to ignore state statutes or rewrite the state constitution, saying, quote, "Rather, the board was required to discount votes that were cast in violation of state law." Again, as I mentioned, a very quick timeline in regards to what we are going to see over the next couple of days. Allison Riggs and her camp need to have all of their paperwork filed by Thursday. Griffin will have a final chance to respond to that on Monday, and then we are expecting a rather quick decision from the North Carolina Court of Appeals. After that takes place, then we could be looking at a situation where either side, depending on how that ruling comes down, either side appeals that to the state's highest court, the North Carolina Supreme Court. And then, of course, if that's the case, we'll see if the state's highest court takes that up. Again, it's been a pretty tricky situation to navigate over the last couple of months. You can read through the entire timeline and get more details by visiting our website this morning, carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:09. Earlier this week, my colleague and Brianna Kraemer over at the Carolina Journal had the opportunity to sit down with the leader of the North Carolina Senate in an interview. That's Phil Berger, and talking about some of the legislative priorities for the Republican-led Senate as they are in the long session right now. Here's part of her conversation with the leader of the North Carolina Senate.
So what are the Senate Republicans planning for in this session, and what can North Carolinians expect to see in the state legislature?
Yeah, so I think our members are, as they have over the years, continuing to work together, continuing to advance what we would consider to be a conservative agenda, working for their constituents. Obviously, each member has some local issue that will be raised by them, but overall, I think we are hitting the ground running. One of the first things that we're going to need to do is an additional bill to deal with hurricane recovery. The House is taking the first stab at that, and they will send a bill over to us. We've got a couple of members who have been working informally with some of the House folks discussing some of those issues. We'll see when the bill gets over what, if any, modifications will need to be made. Beyond that, this week was supposed to be the beginning of what are joint meetings between the House and the Senate budget committees to get an overview of kind of where the state is. We received updated information from both our nonpartisan staff and the governor's staff on projections as far as revenue is concerned. So that's one of the first steps, is just to make sure that the state's still in solid position as far as state revenue is concerned. And they'll begin the process of reviewing various budgets. A couple of weeks from now, the Senate folks will break off from those joint meetings, and we'll begin the process of constructing the Senate version of the budget. I think we've agreed with the governor on a date for the State of the State address. I think an announcement will be coming out soon as far as that's concerned. And so it's a fairly regular start of a legislative long session.
And in terms of transparency, what do you think the North Carolina General Assembly could do to enhance transparency and increase maybe access to public records and the ability for North Carolinians to view what is happening in the General Assembly?
Yes, so all of our committee meetings are streamed online, and they're available. Nothing prevents an individual from recording that as it is taking place. I believe there are actually some press outlets that do record those committee meetings and post them online, so I think that information is available. Beyond that, if folks just have a Wi-Fi connection but don't have the ability to see, they can get the audio. Our legislative sessions themselves, the voting sessions of the Senate, are streamed. The audio is streamed as the session is ongoing. The press generally will have one or more cameras in the session at that time. I've not had members come to me with recommendations or suggestions about going beyond that. Obviously, if it's something that comes up, we'll have a discussion about it, but I believe every citizen in North Carolina, to the extent that they're interested in what's happening at the General Assembly, has the ability to access those things as they occur.
Okay, so possibly discussions one day if more people bring it up on like maybe camera options.
Sure, we can always talk about that, and we'll see whether or not there are some enhancements that the members are supportive of.
We'll have more with Brianna's conversation with the leader of the North Carolina Senate, Phil Berger, coming up here in just a few minutes. It's now 5:14, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at traffic on this Wednesday morning. An update with the great Boomer Von Cannon.
Very good, thank you.
hot. It's 5:21. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. It was a busy day in Raleigh yesterday as there were over a dozen committee meetings for the North Carolina General Assembly. We're looking at a very similar schedule to that today as well. And a bill in the General Assembly aims to bring the state's tax code in line with federal law by allowing taxpayers to deduct gambling losses capped at the amount of their winnings on their state tax returns. House Bill 14, which we discussed back a few weeks ago, described by its sponsors as a matter of tax fairness rather than a gambling bill, seeks to correct what some lawmakers see as an unjust taxation of gross gambling winnings rather than net earnings. Representative Aaron Perret of Wake County said in a committee meeting yesterday, quote, "Unlike federal law and unlike the majority of other states that have legal sports betting, North Carolina does not allow gambling losses to be deducted, capped at the winnings on your state tax return. This is not a gambling bill. This is a fair tax bill. This bill does not take a position on whether gambling is right or wrong. In fact, the supporters of this bill that you'll see as our primary sponsors, some of them are not big fans of gambling or sports betting at all. Under current North Carolina law, individuals who engage in legal sports betting or other forms of gambling are taxed at their gross winnings without the ability to deduct losses. This differs from federal tax policy, which permits deductions for gambling losses up to the amount of winnings. The discrepancy has led to situations where taxpayers must pay income tax on money that they never actually profited from. The bill was up for discussion, not a vote, during Tuesday's House Commerce Committee meeting. Perret gave her colleagues the scenario of a hypothetical bettor who deposits $10,000 into a sports betting platform, wins $10,000, and then loses $10,000, effectively breaking even. While the federal government would recognize no taxable net income on this scenario, North Carolina law would currently require that bettor to pay state income tax on the full $10,000 in gross winnings, despite not having actually made any gains. At the 2024 tax rate of 4.5%, that would result in a $450 tax bill. Perret, bettor James Joyce told the committee during the public comment period, quote, "The moment we realized the implications of this, we stopped gambling because it's tough enough to beat the house, much less pay additional taxes when you win. We are proud North Carolinians who want to pay our fair share of taxes. Taxing winnings without allowing for losses of deductions is completely unjust. The federal government allows deductions for gambling losses. Why is North Carolina ignoring this fair and reasonable precedent?" Opponents say the bill would provide additional revenue to those who are already struggling with a gambling disorder. Reverend March Creech of the Christian Action League told lawmakers yesterday, quote, "It also potentially erodes the state's tax base as deductions lower the overall tax revenue. While the intent behind this bill might be to provide financial relief, it inadvertently promotes riskier gambling behavior, subsidizing any activity with high social costs, and could lead to further expansion of the gambling industry at the expense of our state's welfare." Representative Keith Kidwell of Beaufort County, who has historically opposed gambling expansion, however, he is a sponsor of House Bill 14. He argued that the state tax code on gambling winnings contradicts the North Carolina Constitution, which states that only net incomes should be subject to taxation. He said, "If we look into the Bible will tell us that that you render unto Caesar what Caesar's, and you render unto the Lord what is the Lord. It does not say you pay additional." Kidwell said that all this bill does is seek to fix North Carolina state law and put it in line with federal law. The bill is expected to be debated upon further committee, potentially facing a vote sometime next week in front of the full North Carolina House. We'll keep an eye on House Bill 14 and many other fast-moving pieces of legislation on our website, carolinajournal.com, and right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:25. Continuing our conversation conversation this morning, or Brianna Kraemer's conversation with the leader of the North Carolina Senate, Phil Berger, earlier this week.
Now, there's been one Hurricane Helene bill introduced this session, providing over $500 million for Western North Carolina in the recovery process. Can you talk to us about the recovery and how the state legislature and the federal government are working together, and with FEMA as well, to aid Western North Carolina on their road to recovery?
Yeah, so I think the unfortunate thing at this time is there is a bit of uncertainty as to exactly what we're going to see from the federal government, and there's a good bit of concern about the administrative structure that exists at the federal level, particularly with FEMA. So let's talk about a couple of things. So the modification that may be needed at the federal level of funding from the federal level to the state is one that, to the extent that we can move the federal government away from an administrative, what I would consider to be a bloated system, to something in the nature of block grants in certain categories. So we're going to need several $billions to repair the transportation infrastructure that exists, that heretofore existed in Western North Carolina, to get it back to where it was. It would be much better for us if we could get those federal dollars into North Carolina quicker, so that the construction that needs to take place can be contracted and those resources deployed. As far as other federal aid, again, if we can go to more of a block grant program into the state, so that we legislatively can deploy those resources in North Carolina to where the needs are, I think that'd be a much better situation. Back in December, the federal government passed a continuing resolution for the federal budget. In that, there were dollars that were appropriated for disaster relief. Now, some of that was disaster relief for North Carolina, some of it was in Georgia and South Carolina and in other places, in Florida and other places. And so the amount of money that's going to come into North Carolina, I've seen the gross numbers, but as far as how much of that money actually makes it onto the ground into helping people in North Carolina still seems to be somewhat uncertain. I am told, and the conversations we're having with our federal legislators, is that there will be another disaster package that will be included in the next continuing resolution. We'll see if that actually takes place. Again, I am hopeful that when that takes place, we'll see more of the block grant type of deployment of those federal resources, as opposed to funneling the money through those existing programs where a good bit of the money gets eaten up in administrative expense. So we will not, in my opinion, get enough money from the federal government to take care of all of the things that are needed. We will obviously need those dollars to partner with state resources that we have to address what needs to be done in Western North Carolina. The good news is that over the past several years, we've built up a rainy day fund that was at one point about $5 billion. We've already deployed a significant amount from those resources into various pockets to assist. I am hopeful that we will have adequate resources to take care of the needs that are out there, both the infrastructure needs, the needs for our ag community, and needs for individuals with reference to housing and other forms of assistance that have traditionally been provided during disaster.
More of Brianna's conversation with the leader of the North Carolina Senate, Phil Berger, coming up here in just a few minutes. It's now 5:30 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Another look at traffic on this Wednesday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
It's 5:36. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. A busy week in the North Carolina General Assembly as we continue to track that. A bill has been introduced in the Senate to advocate for funding for Charlotte's expanding transit system through a proposed 1-cent sales tax hike. The measure, introduced as Senate Bill 145 by Senators Vicky Sawyer, Bill Rabin, and David Craven, must first gain approval from the Republican-led General Assembly before Mecklenburg County voters can decide on the increase. Key provisions of the bill would authorize the Mecklenburg County Board of Commissioners to instruct election officials to place a sales tax referendum on the ballot, asking voters to choose whether they are for or against a 1% sales and use tax. If approved, the General Assembly would create a new public transportation authority for the county, with tax revenues being distributed to each municipality in the county using a formula outlined in Senate Bill 145. The bill mandates that 40% of the funds be allocated to road projects and 60% to public transportation. Sawyer told the Carolina Journal that North Carolina's transportation funding is strained, which delays key projects. She said, quote, "The transportation infrastructure in North Carolina is woefully underfunded. Inflation, over-programmed projects on the STIP, which is the State Transportation Improvement Program, and Hurricane Helene disaster recovery are all stress points on NCDOT's ability to deliver long-promised projects, especially in fast-growing areas." The legislative findings in the bill claim that the Charlotte region's population will grow by 50% by 2045, where they estimate it to be over 4 million individuals. And Sawyer believes that voters should have the say in local transportation projects. She said, quote, "Mecklenburg County is championing a way of allowing voters to decide on locally administered transportation projects that include both road construction and light rail. As a resident that uses Charlotte's roadways, I see firsthand the need for local governments in fast-growing areas to administer transportation projects for health and the prosperity of their communities. Transportation is critical to North Carolina's economy, enabling economic activity and serving as a major industry itself. Research shows that access to transportation enhances economic mobility, and smart investments can boost productivity and living standards by reducing costs." Senate Bill 145 is currently before the Committee on Rules and Operations of the Senate. It will need a full vote in the Senate as well as a full vote in the House before the elected officials in Mecklenburg County could decide to put something on the ballot. We'll keep a close eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. More with Brianna Kraemer's conversation with the leader of the North Carolina Senate Leader Phil Berger.
Republicans have had an impressive streak of tax cuts in the past decade or so. What can we expect in terms of cutting taxes, reducing regulations on businesses and taxpayers? And is this something that Senate Republicans are working towards in this session?
Yeah, we'll see whether or not any bills get introduced in that regard. You mentioned our record of tax reform in North Carolina, which is pretty substantial. If you were to go back 15 years and looked at what our individual income tax rate was and what our corporate income tax rate was, and look at what the rates are today, I mean, we've basically cut the individual income tax rate in half. We have, as far as the corporate rate, more than cut it in half, and it's on its way to being eliminated in the next 6 years. And so a substantial progression in the right direction of reducing the tax burden on individuals and corporations in North Carolina. There are likely some other areas that we can address the tax structure in North Carolina. You mentioned the franchise tax. I think there are probably some reforms that can take place there, although we've made some substantial progress as far as reforming the franchise tax as well. Beyond that, there are questions about deductions, questions about how we handle the sales tax, whether or not the base for sales tax is something that might need to be looked at. So we will continue to look at ways to address the tax burden on the private sector, and we'll do that in a way that allows the private sector to continue to grow and prosper in North Carolina, because ultimately the growth that we're seeing in the state has facilitated a growth in the economy of the state, which has facilitated the collection of revenue even at lower rates that exceeds what we heretofore collected. So to the extent that we can continue to reduce the rates, continue to simplify the tax code, whether it's the individual or corporate code, or it's the franchise code, or some other tax provisions, we intend to do that.
There's been a strong push for constitutional carry, and that is something that you co-signed this session. What are your thoughts on constitutional carry, and is this something that the Senate and the House can both push through in the long session?
Yeah, so I'm not going to comment on whether it'll move in the House. I have no idea for sure. You know, they had a bill introduced last time that they didn't move. So we'll see what happens there. On the Senate side, and as far as support for that legislation, I've been supportive of constitutional carry for a long period of time. I signed on to the bill this time. My recollection is that no bill was introduced in the Senate last session, and so I expect that we'll have conversations within our caucus as to where our members are. I feel like there's support for passing constitutional carry in the Senate, and we'll make a decision as to when that bill moves.
Now, according to reports, North Carolina is the most expensive state for healthcare in the country. How can the General Assembly address this issue and help lower costs for North Carolinians for their healthcare plans in the state amid these high prices?
I think to the extent that we can infuse market forces into the healthcare economy, that we can allow those forces to help drive down costs, or at least to slow the growth in cost of healthcare. Some of those things include certificate of need. The very idea that a governmental entity has the wisdom, the wherewithal, the prudence to make a decision as to how many hospital beds are needed in a particular community, or how many diagnostic machines are needed in a community, how much health care is needed from an economic standpoint in a community. We need to let markets make those determinations, and to the extent that certificate of need requirements impair the ability of market participants to make those decisions, I think we need to alter our certificate of need protocols and maybe eliminate it altogether. I would certainly be in favor of that. Beyond that, to the extent that we can increase the supply of health care within North Carolina, then we need to find ways to do that. One of the ways to do that would be to increase practice authority for highly trained nurses, to allow them to have independent practices with appropriate oversight, and in that way we help address, particularly in rural areas, the lack of healthcare professionals who can treat individuals in those communities. I think it helps the overall situation with healthcare availability in North Carolina. Certainly helps in those rural areas, and will increase supply of providers. And by increasing those supplies, hopefully drive down or at least ameliorate the upward pressure on cost. There are other market type reforms that we would need to look at, and we'll try to look at. Fortunately or unfortunately, in the healthcare space. There are a lot of existing market participants who have a slice of the current market and will jealously guard any incursion into that, and would try to protect that turf. And that's just a battle that usually gets resolved, or at least gets addressed in Legislative Hall.
That is our conversation this morning with Brianna Kraemer and the leader of the North Carolina Senate leader, Phil Berger. You can read more on that story and check out the entire interview by visiting our website this morning at carolinajournal.com. Where it's now 5:47, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Another look at traffic on this Wednesday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you. your emergency situation station.
Hot. It's 5:51. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour, streaming live this morning on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. Also, you can take the show with you on demand by checking out our podcast, available wherever you get your shows. Just search for the Carolina Journal News Hour in your favorite podcast app. The Senate, this is Washington, D.C., the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee held a confirmation hearing yesterday morning for former Republican North Carolina Representative Dan Bishop, the nominee for Deputy White House Budget Director in the United States Office of Management and Budget, or OMB. U.S. Senator Ted Budd introduced Bishop and talked about his first meeting when Budd was in his late 20s running a landscaping and janitorial business while Bishop was a Mecklenburg County commissioner. Here is how that introduction unfolded yesterday in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee. It's my honor to be here to introduce a good friend and colleague, Dan Bishop. Long before I was ever in Congress, when Amy Kate and I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, everyone would tell me, if you want to meet a great leader, get to know County Commissioner Dan Bishop. At that time, I was helping run a landscaping and janitorial business. I was in my late 20s, and I was probably a little too nervous to reach out and call him. I mean, it was a big county. Who knew then that years later I'd have the privilege to serve with Dan in the House of Representatives? I've seen firsthand his thoughtfulness, his deep understanding of the issues, his love for our country, his care for people, and his commitment to stopping runaway spending and getting the federal budget under control. I have no doubt that Dan will bring the same tenacity to the job at OMB that he has shown throughout his career, both as a litigator and his time serving the people of North Carolina in public office. Dan, Godspeed, and best of luck. And to the members of the committee, y'all be nice.
That was yesterday in Washington, D.C. The introduction there from U.S. Senator Ted Budd as Dan Bishop took place in this committee hearing. Bishop served for 5 years in Congress before running for the North Carolina Attorney General position and losing to former Congressman Jeff Jackson, a Democrat, in the November general election. Trump nominated Bishop to this position in December. He said that it has been an honor to be nominated by Trump for such an important agency that crafts the president's budget, manages and coordinates it amongst federal agencies, along with implementing the president's regulatory agenda. And it is a critical part of ensuring that the government responds to the democratically elected president and to respond to the will of the American people, who want accountability, transparency, and an end to waste and the Washington status quo, and to not be entrenched in Washington's interests and the political establishment. Bishop said yesterday during the hearing, quote, "They recognized in this past election that our nation was at a crossroads, on the precipice of either renewed greatness or ruin. In that precarious moment, they placed their confidence in President Donald Trump to usher in a new golden age for America, and I'm here on behalf of that mission." Questioning and statements ran along party lines with Democrats like Senator Gary Peters of Michigan, who told Bishop that his record and views, including support of legislation that would make all federal employees at will, give him serious pause about how he would manage the federal workforce. He also said he had questions about Bishop's record for what he said was, quote, disregard for independent oversight, including retaliatory actions by revealing the name of a whistleblower, end quote there. Peters and Senator Andy Kim from New Jersey would ask Bishop if the recent firing of several civil servant employees were done in a way in which was indiscriminate. He replied no, adding that the change might have been necessary after those advising Trump took a look at the size of the federal workforce. Bishop said that he supports President Trump's views, which include spending money on things that have not been appropriated by Congress, and that his decision-making would involve lawyers, not him. When Senator Elise Slotkin of Michigan asked if he believed that the president had the ability to spend appropriated dollars in different ways than were appropriated, She would later ask if Trump would have been right to take money out of Social Security, to which Bishop said he didn't believe Trump could stop benefits from being paid. In the back and forth exchange, she said, quote, "I don't think any American, red, blue, or purple, the whole thing, should trust that these programs that they've worked for their entire life are safe if you believe you can do anything that you want with it." Bishop replied that there are distinctions that need to be made and referenced President Harry Truman's excessive and his exercise of dealing with various federal funds in regards to the federal government. This was a very lengthy back and forth during this committee hearing, which took place again yesterday in front of the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. We have got a lengthy write-up, including some pictures this morning, over on our website, carolinajournal.com. Well, that's going to do it for a Wednesday edition. We have another busy day in Raleigh today, the North Carolina General Assembly. Dozens of committee hearings. We'll be watching those closely and have those details coming up for you tomorrow morning. That's going to do it for a Wednesday edition. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back with you Thursday morning, 5 to 6 a.m. right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.